Hello, welcome back. Apologies for the slight technical issues we've been having today. But yeah, hopefully we've ironed those out. It is one of those issues. I had an issue with my bandwidth, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Finbarr, who's going to be taking us through some of the issues that we've been having through there and looking at the importance of network strategies for communication service providers. Without any more, I'm going to hand over to Finbarr. Finbarr, over to you.
Thanks, Dom. So excited to be here, of course, today. I am sadly not in Munich or Germany at all. I'm in London, but that is the state of the day. Hopefully, I'm coming through clearly. You can see I'm wearing a shiny new headset here from our audio sponsor, Polycom. If you want to win one, there is a quiz at the end of the day where you can win one of these if you just answer the questions based on what's been going on in my presentation and in other presentations throughout the day. So I just want to call out that. Hopefully the audio quality is good and you're all coming through clearly. So I'm Finbarr Begley, as Dom said. I'm the networking analyst at Cavell, and I'm just going to talk to you today about the importance of network strategies for CSPs. Obviously, you've probably all had a network strategy, but I think that's getting more and more important as technologies are developed and as the burdens on enterprise networks keep growing due to something that I've started to call application density, which I think is a fairly self-explanatory term, but I'm going to unpack it a bit more as we go through this presentation. So to start off with, I just like to do some quick definitions of the keywords that I use because networking loves its keywords. And you'll have heard these before, but I want to make sure everyone's on the same playing field if you haven't heard them, just so everyone's clear about how Cavell looks at them and how I look at them as an analyst. So first we have SD-WAN, so software-defined wide area networking. The wide area network, of course, is the business network between multiple sites, which some argue will now include all of the people who are working from home and need secure access and WAN-like features for their home office as well as from business offices. So that's becoming a lot more relevant. And really all that is where the WAN intelligence and management has been taken and moved to the cloud with less specific hardware functions and more generic hardware doing multiple things, deploying easier, being a lot more flexible, being a lot more centrally managed and managed from the cloud. And there's a lot of literature about why that's good and all the benefits from that, which we can talk through. If anyone's got questions, let me know. And then we've got Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, which is a new term in 2020 that everyone's been sort of taken on board. And really, the best way to think about that is just a new model of distributed security, where the solutions are moved to the cloud rather than being hosted in traditional corporate data centers. So rather than having a centralized firewall that my remote employees dial into and then dial out to another site, they're much more likely to go to a cloud firewall, wherever the closest one is to them, and then go from there to the nearest cloud location. And that's growing in popularity because a lot of the places where the cloud firewalls are hosted are also places where the local instance of Office 365 is hosted. So you get that direct connection across. The main things to be aware of is that it tends to focus on identity and individual needs rather than generic policies. And the goal really is to ask those questions. Who is this person? What are they trying to access? And what network are they trying to access from? And very much when you have the ability, and that the reason this is growing as a technology, is that you have the ability to be more aware of what's happening on the network, be more aware of the device, get a lot more data, which allows you to make specific ideas and profiles based on actual users and whether they're accessing from their house or they're with a specific endpoint device that is secure, or they're trying to access from a coffee shop Wi-Fi. All of these things impact the level of security solutions and the level of access you're going to give them. And SASE aims to be aware of that and treat every access device as an edge device that's in need of securing and figure out the best plan for securing that edge device. So those are two terms you're probably going to hear me talk about a bit, just because they're kind of relevant in terms of the broader industry. And I mean, if you were paying attention to the Cisco presentation earlier, he was talking about this, but very keen not to use that acronym too much because it can put people off having too much acronym bingo. So the biggest challenge in 2020 is not a great surprise to anyone. Obviously, home working. You went essentially from having, maybe 50 sites to almost every single home worker in some way needed to be considered as a site for your business, because essentially the level of cloud applications that are now being used in most businesses mean that for everyone, typically, there needs to be at least some form of awareness of their network at home and how that is accessing the internet. So, how that is accessing the company services. And even if that's just, that person needs more home bandwidth in order to handle the services the company is asked. So just to dig in a little deeper, and I know everyone is working on the assumption that home working is rising, but I want to quickly just show you the level at which it has risen. It is risen. So if we look at the US and EU, and this is the number of companies that have said they have over 50% of their employees working from home over 50% of the time, so more than 3 days a week. And you see in 2019, we started off SMEs 21% because they're not always in the office, mid-level 8%, large 7%. Obviously, in 2020, you see a 15% rise in the smalls, a huge rise in medium and large companies to roughly 43 and 48%. Now, the general assumption is that's going to go down, and we see that that's true, that it does drop quite significantly, but never really return to the levels that are expected in 2019. Now, whether it does taper off a bit more in 2021 as people feel more confident that the current crisis is over, we'll see. But for the moment, the plan very much, and what we've seen from talking to companies, is that office space is going to be reduced and home working going to become a lot more normal now. That's the US and EU figures from our enterprise research. Overall, then, looking specifically at Germany, because I think this is what people are here to see, we see that it starts at fairly low levels, similar to overall, but sort of not similar to other markets in Europe. Countries like Spain, for example, started from a much higher position. We see a similar surge, but I wouldn't say as large a surge. So rather than jumping up 20 points, we see an increase of maybe 22 or, maybe like 3 points, 5 points at the SME level and 12 points at the large level. So not as huge a spike. But the interesting thing about the German trend, which is not something we're seeing in other markets, is that actually it keeps going up. So whereas in overall and in other markets, we see a huge spike and then a fall off of about 10, 15% in every category. In Germany, we actually see that it goes up and then certainly for the small and the large companies continues to rise. But it doesn't surge as much during the COVID peak. So clearly there is I like to think of it as a dam breaking in terms of old traditions of forms of working, giving way to new approaches, and people realizing that a lot of jobs can actually be done remotely, and having to adjust to a new normal, which seems to be spreading across Europe. So I think those numbers actually show that in Germany, the trend is very much working and is continuing to go up. So home working here to stay. Now, this chart you may have already seen during keynote earlier, but the biggest issues that people had in home working, I want to highlight that the third and fourth one is the right hardware to do remote working and the right network access to do remote working. We have heard a lot of problems with people not having the right network access to do remote working. And that's sort of what I've been dealing with and considering in my role as an analyst is what network access do people need? What network solutions do people need? Because there are a lot of new, more complicated, more interesting network solutions that can solve a lot of bandwidth problems, access problems, those kind of things. And there's been a big question all year, are those solutions suitable for home working? Should my SD-WAN be used for home working? And the reality is, in the majority of situations, let's just jump back for a second. In the majority of situations, those solutions, whilst they are good, are not used or needed for the majority of home workers. The best way to think about it is that home workers can be divided into tiers based on the level of applications they're using and how critical they are for the business. And if you put this in a position where the majority of people who just need to use Word and things like that can actually just work with a better company paid for level of broadband, that actually solves the majority of problems. So what we've been seeing is that in a lot of cases, users have just been either upgrading their broadband bandwidth at home, either helped by the company or by themselves. They've been upgrading the broadband device they use in their house, because a lot of problems have been caused by congestion within the building. So, kids, partners, housemates, all using the same network at the same time, and the actual router in the wireless router in the house not being able to deal with that capacity. And the third thing that we've seen a lot of is this cellular backup in routers, so that if there's a problem, it can fail over to 4G. And that's become quite standard in a lot of companies offering that cellular backup this year as a solution, just to keep your workers online. Then, of course, for the more power level of workers, you obviously do have that additional layer of, yes, we can deploy SD-WAN, we can start using SASE solutions. But for the majority of workers, those haven't been the case. I've seen statistics where it's like 3% of a large company might have a specific networking solution at home. It might just be the high value call center workers. It's very much use case specific. If you've got someone who absolutely needs to be online, absolutely needs high quality of service, absolutely can't have their calls failing, then an SD-WAN box is going to do wonders for them. If you just have people who need to access Word and a few other cloud-based services, then just give them more bandwidth. What we are seeing is an increased pressure and push from employees and culturally to get more assistance with their home working network problems. So very much there is a dialogue going on at the moment, which looks at the cost savings being made from office size reduction, that looks at the cost savings being made from decreased spending on like social things, travel, all those kind of things, and looks at where that money's going. And there's a big discussion as to how much of that money should be redistributed to help, for example, your employees pay for their broadband. So if I'm as an employee who's just using broadband for my personal use, say comfortable with say 15 megabits, 20 megabits, I have 64, but because of the stuff I need to do for my company, suddenly I need 200, and the price difference is £50 a month. There's a discussion going that my company should come in and pay maybe the difference, maybe the entire contract, because they're not paying for other things that they used to pay for, or whether the company should have the right to take that all as savings. And that's a big cultural discussion, which I personally feel will come down in favor of the employees if your company is making, and I think if your company is making you work from home permanently, especially if you work for a large company, all of those HR problems and things we've seen HR have to deal with at large companies, like posture, like time at desk, like mental health, work-life balance, all of those things are going to start to have to be taken into account at the home as well, especially if you think about following the trends from large American companies pushing back towards Europe, where people have been sued in America if they've been forced to work in a bad posture, for example. And if you're now being asked to work from home and you're being forced to sit at a desk for a long time, then of course that becomes a consideration. And the same is true for network access. Employees at large companies are not always going to have the resources needed to get the appropriate levels of network access by themselves. And in order to avoid problems with the few that can't do it, we might expect HR just to have a mandatory package for home workers. And as service providers, you could suggest those sorts of packages where they come with these additional capabilities, and you help. Essentially, the strategy here is to help people plan and what's happened there, and really help people come up and devise a strategy that takes all of the needs of their different home workers into account. And that's why I think a takeaway, which a lot of people are already going to know, but to dig down a bit deeper, is that you have to have a strategy for home workers, and it has to be specific to multiple tiers of home workers. You can't just have one blanket approach. You need to assess the needs of multiple levels of home workers and come up with a package that supports them all, whether it is a cellular backup device or something more complicated that like SD-WAN or those kind of things. Really, you have to accept there's a lot of use cases. And I think one of the things where I've seen a lot of people struggle is this assumption that they can just deploy a separate wireless access device and things like that. There's an assumption that a lot of people working from home, for example, have a home office to work in, or have a separate place that they can work, or have a separate desk, or have space. One of the things that I found was quite fun is a lot of people assume that people working from home had the right to change the router and the network solution in the house, when a lot of people actually didn't, because it was managed by their landlord, or they couldn't risk the disruption of the internet to their other people living in the house by trying to put something special on, especially if you've got multiple, as is true in London. For example, you have multiple people working in the same room. You have housemates because you have to share to pay rent, and they're not going to agree to your corporate solution because it won't be secure for them. So now just to dig a bit more into network trends. So in terms of what we're seeing people using in terms of network technology and what you need to be aware of when you're planning for what network solutions you're tools need to work with. MPLS still very large in the mid-market, and even at large companies, still a lot of internet-based WAN. That's going up more and more as companies are relying on WAN solutions just to work over the internet rather than mandating they have a private network. So as encryption has gotten better on cloud services and things like that, a lot more companies are just content using internet-based solutions. We're also seeing the rise of SD-WAN. You can see, especially at large companies, SD-WAN is now 20%. SASE is not really seen so much in Germany, and I wonder if that's a branding thing maybe, or it just hasn't been pushed that large by the vendors that have started to work on it. As I mean, all the vendors have started to work on it now. People like Cisco, VMware, and you have specialist people like Cato and stuff like that starting to offer SASE. So I imagine we'll see those numbers tick up next year. So when we look at the top technologies and we ask people what they were using for their networks right now, obviously firewalls are still up there. Cloud-based security has risen massively to sort of be an option. And it's quite interesting to see how cloud-based security has risen up there. And then, of course, we've got other security solutions, things like VPNs. VPNs are the most common security solution that's being used on networks just to connect people securely. And there were some initial problems with VPN concentrators not scaling, but a lot of that has been handled because they're now cloud-based, so they can scale a lot easier. And then next year, we're going to see more cloud-based security, more IoT coming in with all the automation and analytics that are handled there, and more network analytics and visibility. The trends to watch really are that growth of demand for internet breakout. People want their solutions to go directly through the quickest path, not worrying about going via the corporate data center. SD-WAN is scaling down because the software side doesn't matter how it scales so much, and more scaling solutions are being developed. The hardware side is being scaled down as things become cheaper. SASE and distributed security becoming a factor. You need to start thinking about how your communications applications work with SASE. Increased automation is leading to larger vendors wanting to control more of the stack. That's a huge topic that I could get into in detail in another presentation because I realize I'm running out of time. But essentially, automation means you need more data, and needing more data means you have to control more of the stack. So there's something there where service providers need to decide how much of the vendor solutions they're deploying, because they'll get a better service from the increased automation, but they'll also give up more of what's happening. And then increased reliance on IoT, especially for certain verticals. Really, the trend that I'm trying to get across here through security is that you kind of have to figure out how your communication solutions work with distributed security. And you need to make sure that distributed security is sort of something you've considered and you've tested your solution with the new upcoming SASE platforms, as you did with SD-WAN over the past few years, to make sure your communication solutions were prioritized properly by the application. A lot of similar approaches are being taken by distributed security. You need to make sure your solutions work with that. And that's kind of like my big prediction of things you should be doing for the next year. So I'm going to wrap up now because I know that the next speaker is eager to get on. Obviously, I've covered a lot of ground in this, and there's a lot of network questions. So if you want to, discuss this any further, please feel free to either connect with me on chat, direct message me here, or send me an email. I'm happy to get into a bit more detail on any of these network discussions. So thanks a lot, and I will speak to you all soon. I'm going to hand you back over to Dom to introduce the next speaker.